As they say in Glasgow, hiya, hiya. I'm Kathy Baughman McLeod. I'm the director of the Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council. And on behalf of Adrienne Arsht, who sends a special hello to Senator Coons, fellow Delawarean, and the Rockefeller Foundation, and my colleague, Randy Bell, who runs the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council, and the Race to Resilience. Welcome to the Resilience Hub here at COP26, and to a new episode of Live at COP26 from the Atlantic Council. We are thrilled to welcome you. Our mission here at the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, which we say for short, Arsht Rock Resilience Center, is to build the resilience capacity for fighting climate change for people. And the effects of climate change are around us every day. Something really important happened this week, and I think it's not fully understood. And that is, for the first time ever in the COP world, the metric for climate progress is not only being measured by metric tons of carbon and finance deployed. It's being measured by human life. And the Race to Resilience has set a target of 4 billion people's lives improved with resilient solutions by 2030. 4 billion people, not money, not metric tons of carbon, human beings. It's a turning point. It's big. And 3 years ago, when we relaunched our center, the Arsht Rock Center, we set a goal of reaching 1 billion people with resilient solutions. One of the things that's harming people and economies the most, very little understood climate impact, is heat, extreme heat. It's killing more Americans, more people in the world than any other climate-driven hazard. In 2020, it killed 20 times more people than hurricanes did, and it cost the US economy $100 billion. It's secret, it's pernicious, but we can do something. There are solutions, many, many solutions. And we're working with partners in the US and around the world to name and categorize heat waves, to set heat seasons, and to name chief heat officers in communities all around the world who wake up every day to protect people from the vagaries, from the viciousness of extreme heat, and protect their livelihoods. The key thing to know are there are solutions and that people do not have to die from heat. And today, speaking of solutions, is a historic moment to have you all here, a bipartisan delegation at the COP, to discuss the way forward to protect Americans from climate change, to look at the transition to a renewable future, and to chart that path is exciting and extremely promising. Thank you for being here. You may have noticed that my second surname is McLeod, and my husband's father was the president of the Clan McLeod Society of the US. And the Clan McLeod motto is hold fast. And so I hope today, as you undertake your conversations and the pathways we find to work together all across the spectrum of perspectives, that we will hold fast. Thank you very much. And let me hand it over to Jen Austin, who is the head of policy and strategy for the High-Level Climate Champions, and here working closely with Nigel Topping. Thank you very much, and may you have great conversations as you hold fast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for having us here today. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome this delegation to the Resilience Hub. This is one of 140 events happening here at the Resilience Hub over the course of these 2 weeks, and we do believe that this is one of the first times that resilience has had a shared physical home within the COP, which represents the importance of the issue, the importance that we put on the issue. Certainly for people who have been to a COP before, you'll know it's not the first time that resilience and adaptation has been an issue. It's been at the core of the discussions of the COP and the climate conversation for a long time, but it's often not given the same level of attention and importance across the spectrum as mitigation, and it is extremely important. We know it's important globally. It's a global issue. The systems that we all depend on are globally interconnected, food systems, trade and economic systems. It's also very local. Everywhere is dealing with these issues in its own way. It's hitting home across the states, across the U.S. In every corner, we see heat waves, as you mentioned, fires, wildfires, historic storms, storms in the Gulf, Midwest, derecho storms that are bigger than we've ever seen. The damages are piling up bigger and faster than we've ever seen. It's visible, the science we know is clear and has been set for quite some time. That's only becoming more urgent. The impacts are now quite visible in daily lives in ways that are making the issue ever more urgent for everybody and ever more apparent. It's why we, in our work, have placed an equal emphasis on both resilience and mitigation. And so, as Kathy mentioned, we're with this group called the High-Level Champions for Climate Action, which is a nice long UN title given to one individual each year appointed by the presidency of the COP, whose job is to mobilize, organize, and bring in all of the non-state actors, another great term, sort of defining the negative space, that is the people who don't negotiate the agreement, the actual countries, but everybody else in society who is so critical for the implementation of those solutions, both on the mitigation and the adaptation side. So I often say that we have one of the more fun jobs in this process because in a difficult issue that we're all trying to combat, we get to work with people who are pushing the boundaries of action and implementation and innovation across the range of issues and across the world. And so we have two signature campaigns. One is called the Race to Resilience, and one is called the Race to Zero. And we use those to organize those efforts, and a lot of those efforts have been on display here and downstairs throughout the week. Fortunately, as we've said, investing in all of these climate solutions and increasingly resilience is not just the right thing to do because of the impacts, but it's the smart thing to do. And it's more than just damage limitation. We talk about the goal of, as you said, raising the resilience of 4 billion people by 2030, putting people at the heart of that campaign, and with the goal that people can not only survive, but thrive in the face of a changing climate. We know we also have to work hard on mitigation, but that there are issues and impacts already that we cannot avoid, and that we need to make sure that we're adapting to those in a way that's smart. And that there are many benefits to doing so, that increasing jobs, safety in communities, cleaning up nature, ensuring that there's cleaner and healthier air, cleaner water, and that these are benefits that everybody wants in their communities everywhere around the world in a very localized way. I wanted to mention that we haven't been able to travel much over the last 2 years. So Nigel Topping, the high-level champion from the UK, is based in the UK. Gonzalo Munoz is based down in Chile. They hosted the last COP. I'm usually based in the US, working with both of them. They both came for a visit to the US on one of the first trips that they'd done together in a long time, actually. And we had a great visit to DC, met a number of partners, had a great roundtable with the Atlantic Council. We also visited Louisiana, in particular to focus on some of the adaptation and resilience efforts. We saw a number of, a ton of preparedness work going on there in the Mississippi River Delta. The other trip that Nigel and I have done together about a month ago was to Egypt. And the parallels are quite interesting. It is most likely, almost guaranteed, though not yet official, that the Egyptians will host the next COP. And so we expect that they'll be hosting the next COP. They'll appoint a high-level champion from Egypt who will become our partner in this work. Resilience will be absolutely top of their agenda. And when we visited there, we stayed right on the banks of the Nile. The Nile River is the heart and soul of the Egyptian economy and of Cairo, and resilience is high on their agenda for that reason. And seeing that parallel between there and New Orleans and the issues that both are facing and dealing with, real leadership and innovation in both places, I think, that can learn from each other and really help bring solutions together and help bring this global issue together. So we have partners working in all of these places. We have partners in the US who are eager to partner with all of you, including the Ash Rock Center that's working on extreme heat. And so lastly, we just wanted to, applaud your bipartisan efforts on this issue. Encourage you to continue to work together on this. We know that these problems will outlast any individual government and that they need long-term sustainable solutions. And so really eager to have the conversation here today. And it is my honor to hand it over to Senator Coons from Delaware, the co-chair of the Senate Climate Solutions Caucus.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here at the Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Hub. How terrific to have an opportunity to introduce a bipartisan panel. I am grateful for my delegation, a truly resilient delegation who flew overnight and put in a full-day meeting with leaders of the EU and NATO and are now here at COP26. 5 years ago at COP21, we had dueling delegations. One that was there to say that climate change was a fraud and we should do nothing, and another that was there to say it's urgent and we need to take action. Senator Mike Braun, a Republican from Indiana, and I co-founded the Climate Solutions Caucus several years ago. A number of the members of the caucus are here with us. And our point across the 14 members, 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats, is not that we agree on every policy proposal, but that we agree that the climate is changing and that human action is contributing to it, and we need to find sustainable solutions. So Debbie Stabenow, who's chair of the Agriculture Committee, worked hard with Mike Braun on introducing and getting past the Growing Climate Solutions Bill, which she'll speak about. I'm working with a number of colleagues, Republican and Democrat, on a resiliency planning bill for the United States. I'll introduce this panel that's been incredibly patient in just a moment, but if you'll forgive me one victory lap. The bipartisan infrastructure bill just passed the House, is on its way to President Biden's desk. And a big part of the climate provisions of that bipartisan infrastructure bill are implementing the 2020 Energy Policy Act. Senator Lisa Murkowski, who's with us, who was the chair of the Energy Committee, along with her ranking member Joe Manchin, passed the Energy Policy Act. It was signed into law by President Trump late in 2020. There was a lot of other stuff going on, so it didn't get as much attention as it deserved. But it authorized a very wide range of energy efficiency and energy deployment and energy innovation programs and initiatives. $73 billion of that bipartisan infrastructure bill is funding the deployment of those authorized programs. There's also $43 billion in that bipartisan infrastructure bill dedicated to climate resiliency. So we've laid a good foundation that this panel can now have a chance to speak to if they wish. Let me briefly introduce this panel. It's Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan, chair of the Agriculture Committee, Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, and Congressman John Curtis of Utah, who is the chair of the Conservative Conservation Caucus. And we're honored to have you join us. This is a bipartisan panel, which I think is a rarity, if not unique, in the history of COP. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Benji Backer, who is going to be the facilitator, the moderator of this panel. Benji, thank you for demonstrating what a young generation of conservative Americans can bring to the conversation about climate. Let me hand the microphone over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator. And I know for the essence of time, before I even introduce myself and the panel, I'm going to turn things over to Representative John Curtis because he has a time commitment that he needs to run to. But before I do that, and before I introduce him, or before he talks, I want to introduce him because Congressman John Curtis is someone that allows young people on the right of center space like myself to have hope. He's somebody who fights for bipartisan climate policies, policies that work for his district, which is an traditional energy district, but also inspires the young people in his district to take action in their own communities. He's led in a way similar to Senator Murkowski that I, as a young person, have a voice in Congress for the first time in many, many years on the right side of the aisle. I'm so proud to know you as a friend. I'm so proud that you've started what is one of the biggest caucuses in the House, the Conservative Climate Caucus, and I'm just super excited for the tide that we are changing, and I'll turn it over to you for now.
Thank you, Benji. My name's John Curtis, and I'm a Republican. And I'm a cop. How cool is that, right? The good senator and I are used to being the elephant in the room on climate conversations. And I'm really pleased to be here. My only regret is I do have another commitment, so I'm going to leave you in the able hands after I just share a few thoughts with you. But these are thoughts that I think are incredibly important for you to see in order to get a little insight into what's going on in the House with Republicans with climate. And let me start by telling you two quick stories. One is Benji Backer and I sat on a mountaintop in Utah that overlooked Utah Valley, my home, that we climbed to on a recent trip that he took out there. And we sat on top of this and we said, wouldn't it be cool if we could get Republicans together in the House to talk about climate? Because there's just not a lot of conversations going on, right, Benji? So we dreamed and we imagined what it would be like. So we decided to invite some Republicans, lawmakers from the House to Utah to talk about climate. And my staff said, sure, go ahead. You'll have 5. If you have 5, it will be a success. Last February, 24 members from the House flew to Utah to talk about climate. 6 of them were ranking members. Every member over the Committee of Jurisdiction came to Utah to talk about climate. Thank you. It is very, very exciting. Now, I'm also aware that we're talking in perspective to my Democratic colleagues who could easily say, well, that's all right, but thank you for acknowledging that that's a big deal. Out of that came the idea to form the Conservative Climate Caucus. Why the Conservative Climate Caucus and not just a caucus with Democrats and Republicans? My answer to that is Republicans needed help to get at the table so that we could have this conversation. So we dreamed big again, and we said, let's form the Conservative Climate Caucus. And I remember on the fly-in day we were making the announcement, my staff said, we've got 30 members who have joined this. Isn't that amazing? Within 2 weeks, 70 members of the House of Representative Republicans joined the caucus. The first tenet of the caucus is the climate's changing and man's had some influence on it. Now let's go do something about it. That's 1/3 of all Republicans in the entire House of Representatives. And I'm just telling you how exciting it is to be engaged and to be talking about it. Now let me tell you another story. That's really exciting. This other one's a little bit tough. I represent a county that's called Carbon County. Anybody want to speculate what they do in Carbon County? And I see firsthand the resistance to change, right? I see men and women who for generations sacrificed their health and their safety so that we could all go to a wall and flip a switch and turn on the light or turn on the heat. And now we villainize not just coal, but we villainize the very people that do that. And so I've got these two extremes in my life. And I think that there's a real role for Republicans in helping the world and the nation understand how we truly transition these communities out of the situation they're in. And I will tell you this, they know that coal is out. They know that. They're not stupid people, right? They just hate to be villainized because they were part of that process. And they don't like it when my colleagues back in Washington say, we're going to teach you how to code. Don't worry, we're going to teach you how to code, right? So I think part of this resiliency needs to be understanding what it's like to have been from that. I made the mistake once of looking at a very strong woman in the eyes and saying, you know, mining has not been good for you. And she teared up and she said, don't you dare say that. My grandfather was a miner. My father was a miner. My son's a miner. Don't you dare say that. And I just think we need to learn, if we're going to make progress, how to deal with that. So I'm just delighted here. And if you remember nothing else about what I say, I want you to know, and I mean this with all my heart, Republicans care deeply about this earth and about our stewardship. We may not have learned how to talk about it. We may not have, we may have allowed ourselves to be branded as not caring, but I promise you, we care, and we're serious about being part of the solution in a bipartisan manner. Absolutely something the senator said, let me just put a big exclamation point by. We know the climate's changing. We know man's had an influence on it. We know we must reduce emissions. Now let's have a thoughtful conversation about how we do that. And that's a new place, I think, for us. Pleased to be welcomed here at Cobb. Pleased to be here with you. I regret I can't spend a little bit more time, but thank you for just giving me this minute. Senator, it's a real honor to be with you, and lots more discussions ahead of us. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Congressman. So to start out, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Benji Backer. I'm the president and founder of the largest conservative environmental organization in the country. I am so proud to be here, and I will be serving as kind of the Chris Wallace of this panel. I will have to step in because we don't have a ton of time, but what I wanted to start out with is one personal story. You can tell I'm young because I don't have any facial hair and I can't grow it, but I grew up in Wisconsin. I'm going to make this a little awkward. I campaigned against Senator Baldwin. And I mention that as I was very young and active in politics from a very young age, and the thing that was more important to me than Republican politics was the environment. and climate change, and fighting for reforms that protected our planet regardless of political affiliation. And I became incredibly frustrated with the fact that the Republican Party didn't have a seat at the table. And I find so much joy in being able to share the stage with you, because this is proof that someone who campaigned against you as a young kid can moderate a panel and look up to your leadership on climate, and that despite our political differences on other issues, we can find common ground on the one thing that unites us, which is nature and the environment. But unfortunately, it has been so politicized and left my generation behind. I'm a Gen Zer. I don't identify as a Gen Zer in terms of my livelihood. I don't know how to do TikToks and all that stuff. But I'm a Gen Zer, and we need both parties to work together to find climate solutions, because we don't have time to wait for the perfect party to be in power to make action happen. And at the end of the day, we need to put aside the angry tweets, the campaigning on this issue, the yelling at politicians. We need to put aside the anger on this issue that has divided us for so long, and come together on what we can fight together on, and go our separate ways when we can't find that common ground. And I think what we're showing here today is that for the first time ever here across the ocean, you have a cross-partisan, bipartisan group of individuals, from Senator Murkowski to Congressman Curtis to these amazing Democratic senators sitting on stage here, that we can move forward on this for the first time ever. We're making history, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. My generation is going to thank us, because we're at a pivotal point where we can go in the place of divisiveness and polarization on this issue like we have been, and let this earth continue to struggle, or we can find a better path forward, which is a path forward of solutions. And I think that today and here on out, we need to set the priority on solutions, not politics, and find a way to solve climate change. So I'm very, very honored to be here. And one of the major things that we have been able to find common ground on so far is natural climate solutions. For those of you who don't know what natural climate solutions are, they're what they sound like. It's using nature to fight climate change. It's planting more trees, restoring wetlands, restoring grasslands, focusing on blue carbon, ocean waterways to soak up carbon emissions. We've found that can bring in new communities into the conversation. And so while I might have to cut you off after about a minute and a half or 2-minute answers, kind of pretend that you're on TV. You've got that like 30-second, 1-minute answer. You can go a little bit longer. I want to hear from each of you, why this issue is so important to you to be bipartisan, and why natural climate solutions, which is the topic of this conversation, can be one of the first bridges that we use to get there. And Senator Gillibrand, I'll start with you.
Global climate change is something that has really affected my state personally, because we've seen severe weather. So during Superstorm Sandy, we saw whole communities leveled because of 10-foot high storm surges. In the Rockaways, we saw a whole community burn in fire because the electrics of a certain community got on fire. Not one house stood in one community. In Staten Island, the 10-foot surge was so powerful. A mom who got out of her minivan to bring her 2 children to safety was overwhelmed, and the 2 children were lost and died in that surge. So we've had devastation, death, homes, families destroyed. So global climate change is real because severe weather is real. And in New York State, we have a very diverse community. We have cities, we have rural areas, we have mountains. And so not only have we felt the brunt of global climate change, but we also can be a leader in the solutions. And one of the things this panel is going to talk a lot about is those natural solutions. And I sit with Senator Stabenow on the Agriculture Committee, and I know some of our questions will focus on that, so I'll save that part of my answer. But we will help lead the forefront on how to address global climate change aggressively through the natural solutions.
Well, thanks so much to the Atlantic Council and everyone. It's wonderful to be here with my colleagues. I will say things have changed in the natural solution space, just as they have changed at COP when Senator Coons, and we thank you so much for your leadership, but just as there were folks here before on the Republican side saying the climate is not real, climate crisis is not real, and now we're all here together, which is wonderful. 2009, when the U.S. House of Representatives passed a climate bill, very important climate bill, I wrote the provisions in the Senate on agriculture and forestry. Not one agriculture organization supported it. None at the time. Fast forward. Now we have floods and droughts and tornadoes and destruction, and our folks in the field are it's a challenging time, and everyone says, okay, now I get it. The climate crisis is real. Help us to do something about this. And so what we have done, and we've gone from no group supporting legislation to what Senator Coons said. Senator Braun and I have legislation that is co-sponsored by many, many people that focuses on authorizing the USDA to take a lead role on voluntary efforts to help farmers, ranchers, foresters get involved in aggressive carbon sequestration as well as sustainable forestry and so on. 92 members out of 100 in the United States Senate, 92 in the spring, voted for a bill that had the word climate in it, which in the title, which would not have happened very long ago. And so I will just say in conclusion, when we talk about resiliency, the food supply is critical. I mean, the great news is around the world, when we look at places like Africa or so many places around the world where we're talking about 80-90% of the economy is agriculture, and huge forests and carbon sinks and so on, we can and have not focused enough on the value of working with farmers on things that work in terms of keeping carbon in the ground, but also things that work to taking carbon out of the atmosphere, which is trees. We're going to have to do both, and aggressively planting trees, protecting trees. All of the policies that relate to nature-based solutions are a big part of the solution, and I would just say in conclusion, in our Build Back Better investments we're making in our budget, what we've done in agriculture and forestry and in the rural pieces of this, we've been told by Energy Innovation, and as they've looked at the analysis of which part of the bill saves which percentage in terms of emissions reductions, the natural-based solutions came out as 20% of the total emissions reductions. So there's just so much we can do. And we are doing it, by the way, but there's much more to do.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin?
Thank you, Benji. And I enjoyed your story. And so one of the things you asked was, why do I feel this sense of urgency, and why do I feel strongly that we have to work across ideology and partisan lines? Well, number one, we are very lucky to have been born and grown up in Wisconsin, both of us, and it is a gorgeous state. Probably when you were campaigning against me, was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2012. And it was not so long before I got a call from my state director. I was out in Washington, D.C., and there was an extreme weather event in northern Wisconsin where 14 inches of rain had fallen in less than half a day. And small little creeks became walls of water. And roads with insufficient culverts were simply washed out. And people died. And I went up there and toured the damage. It was devastating. People were still trapped in their homes, surrounded by water and not able to drive in or had to take huge detours. 2 years later, same area, another extreme weather event. In each case, they called them 500 or 1,000-year events. We know that's not helpful anymore in our reality. But I was sitting there, within 2 years, there were two 500-year events. And I was seeing this elsewhere in the state too. So there's no time to wait. I want to say a couple of other things really quickly as a sort of introduction to this topic. But at the same time, our farmers and our loggers and timber industry people in Wisconsin are struggling. Our ag secretary would tell us that 90% of farmers and loggers don't make enough from their farming or logging operation to make ends meet, and somebody in the family has to go work off the farm. So we can't start this conversation without including them, no matter what their political stripes, because we can't impose more direction on them if it means they're going to get further behind. And we have to reward these practices. They are the experts, they are the stewards, and they have got to be at the beginning of our conversations as well as the implementers throughout.
Thank you so much. Senator Merkley.
So we'll take a journey across the Rockies to the western part of the United States, where fire is burning up our forests and often our towns. And it was Labor Day of 2020 when I drove 600 miles, never got out of the smoke. 6 towns absolutely incinerated like they had been firebombed. Thousands of Oregonians at the fairgrounds towing their small children, whatever they could run away with, people pouring in to drop off clothing and so forth. Just wow. And it isn't that we didn't have lots of other things going on in our state. Yes, longer fire season, more forest fires. Yes, acidification of the ocean, which is affecting our fishing industry. And pine beetles that are taking over because it's such a hotter, longer summer, and a smaller snowpack, which affects everything from our winter recreation industry to the water for our irrigators, our farmers, and it affects how much water we have for our trout and our salmon in our streams. And the connection I have felt across the aisle is when I go to every rural county each year and hold a conversation, and we talk about how the impact is on farming and forestry and fishing, pillars of the rural economy. And we've got to have that conversation that connects us across urban and rural, and certainly have that conversation that connects us between Democrat and Republican. Not that long ago, right after President Reagan, we had a man named George Bush running for the presidency, Republican candidate, and he ran on climate. So there's plenty of history of both parties being concerned about our natural world and conserving our natural world. Back when I was first learning about climate, I was talking with somebody about how things had gotten out of balance, about carbon in the atmosphere, and how for hundreds of thousands of years we had hovered around 270 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, and then we hit the Industrial Revolution, and whoa, parabolic curve straight up, and it's increasing. The speed is increasing right now. We have all these conversations. It's still increasing straight up, and the person said, if only we had something that would take carbon out of the atmosphere. And I said, well, we grow millions of those in Oregon, which is the connection to our topic today. Because natural systems, whether it's an estuary, a wetland, whether it is riparian areas on a stream, whether it is a forest in its natural form that has adjusted to fire and has older trees with thicker bark, natural systems captured carbon out of the air for millions of years, and they can do so today, and they can be our partners in this. So Democrats, Republicans, and natural systems together, we can, how did you put it, Clan McLeod? Hold fast. We've got to hold fast, but we need natural systems as our partner.
Absolutely love that. And I think what's unique about natural climate solutions is that there is a personal story to each part of this equation. I mean, growing up in Wisconsin, my grandparents talk about the increasing snow line, or the decreasing snow line, that every year it keeps going up, where there's more rain, and now there aren't snow days. There isn't, a white Christmas, and people are starting to notice that. And what I think is really unique about this, though, is that in this world where we have this, a lot of doom and gloom around climate change, for my generation, for a lot of people, it feels like it's hopeless. There's a way to connect this to local communities and actually give some hope, because it allows them to do what they do best. It allows farmers to do what they do best in equipping them with materials to lower their carbon emissions and maybe increase production, or planting trees and helping the timber industry, or managing our forests. There's so many different ways to work on natural solutions to inspire local communities and bring them in. In a lightning round, I would love for each one of you to say what your favorite natural solution is and what you're doing in the Senate to work on it, because I know each one of you have championed different ways of solving this crisis, but you've done it in a bipartisan way, and you've done it in a way that is authentic to your state and to your area of the country. So, Senator Merkley, I might start with you, and I know you touched on trees, but would love for you to talk more about it.
Forest restoration. We have the second growth forests that are very unnatural, canopies the same height, they burn. It's a lightning round, so I'll just say there's a lot we can do to make the forest more resilient to fire, and it creates jobs, and it creates saw logs for our mills.
Senator Baldwin.
Gosh, this is hard on a lightning round because I've seen so many great innovations on farms, but everything from no-till and using cover crops, reinforcing reinforcing riverbanks so that these big storm events don't wipe them out. I would say, sustainable forestry, all sorts of wonderful practices that I think are really great.
I will say amen to that, and then I would say that in the area that the president announced a couple of days ago on methane pledge, it's very important in the area of agriculture. We have significant resources to help with methane digesters, to be able to help manage our wonderful manure pits, but also, I hope no one's eating. But but also on the front end, literally on the front end, the work that we're doing. Secretary Vilsack and I announced some conservation innovation grants today that are focusing on different kinds of feed so that the animals are producing less methane. And I would say I'm going to take the privilege of one other thing, and that is in the area of environmental justice. A very important piece on resiliency and money that we have in Build Back Better is for urban tree planting, because we have way too many places in our urban areas that are way too hot because there's no trees, there's no parks. And so it's a very important piece for us to make sure that we are focusing on environmental justice, and part of that is community gardens and urban ag, but big part of it's trees and planting tree canopies.
They all took mine, but I have more. So I like the money that we put in for resiliency, because flooding is devastating. So, for example, cover crops, as Tammy said, you can do certain kind of cover crops that will hold the soil longer, so when there is flooding, it doesn't just remove all the topsoil. So certain kind of grasses. Also, paying farmers to take some of their land and reforest it so that, again, it prevents flooding when the floods come. In places like Long Island, we've created work for the Army Corps of Engineers to prevent when flooding comes, create berms, put more oysters in, seed the oyster beds, seed the grasses in the ocean, planting things that help prevent the horrible things that happen because of severe weather. And we have developed, certainly in New York State and across the country, the Army Corps of Engineers and great scientists know what to do to protect lives and the health and the well-being, as well as crops and farmland, from massive destruction when these huge weather events happen. So we work really hard on getting resources to the Army Corps, to our farmers through EQIP programs and other things, all to build resiliency, to protect what's there, and it works. And we know the science. And most of it's just planting really good stuff all around the country.
Absolutely. And, between the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which you championed with Republican and Democratic leadership, 92-8, like you said, that gives me hope that this is an issue that we can carry forward. I mean, even in the House, you have Bruce Westerman with the Trillion Trees Initiative. These things alone won't solve climate change, but they help us take these steps in the right direction. And so in 30 seconds or less, you guys have been really, really good, but we're running out of time.
So last one.
Last one, 30 seconds or less. If you were talking to a young person about why they should focus on natural solutions in the entire topic of climate change, we talk so much about energy and kind of the science and all that. This is an area that's left out. Why should young people focus on natural solutions as a way to fight climate change? 30 seconds or less.
I would just say, because the globe is heating up, it's destroying things they care about. Just the change of temperature in a place like New York, it means cows don't produce as much milk. One year alone, they produced up to 20% less milk because it was too hot for them. When it's too hot, there's more ticks. If you have more ticks, you get tick-borne diseases. Tick-borne diseases in upstate New York can literally give you brain damage. Like, the consequences of severe weather, a heating climate, are devastating, including death, and just terrible outcomes for families and communities. So they should care, because lives are on the line, their future's on the line, and everything they care about's on the line. So there are real life consequences in their lifetime to what's happening today.
We should focus on soil as much as oil. The reality is that we should be focusing on those things that are the simplest, that are right in front of us, that can have tremendous impact. And the byproduct is we can protect the water, we can create more wildlife, we can protect our natural spaces. This is something that increases our quality of life. And so we need to be focused on nature-based solutions.
I think I'm going to be a bit of a contrarian on this one to say I know how passionate our young people are about natural solutions and about climate change generally, but it has become harder and harder for young people to get into farming, whether it's anew or even taking on the farm from their families, because of just the economics of these days. And we have to really, really pay attention to that if we want a great next generation of stewards on our farms.
I would tell young folks that when you go and do the physical work on restoring an estuary or a wetland or a riparian area on a stream, the fact that you're out there taking something ugly and making it beautiful is a real high. And the fact that that natural system is going to help save our planet is really cool. And the combination feeds your soul.
Amazing. Well, you heard it here. Natural solutions are the way forward on climate change. Soil, more than oil. I love that too. We have a huge opportunity to fight for nature-based solutions as a country. The future is watching us right now in what we do about climate change. One of the best steps we can take right now is on natural climate solutions. I'm proud that we're working on a campaign called Rooted in America, which has helped put that into the public eye. But we need to prioritize things that work and things that connect people back to what we love, which is nature. And I'm so proud that for the first time ever, we've got cross-partisan folks at COP26, and we're going to be here for years to come. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Please keep your seats as we change to the next panel. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Randy Bell. I'm the director of the Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. Let me welcome our next panelists up to the stage. We have Senator Lisa Murkowski, the Republican from Alaska, Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado, Senator John Hickenlooper, Democrat from Colorado, and Senator Jackie Rosen, the Democrat from Nevada. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are going to talk right now about energy innovation and how energy innovation has become a bipartisan opportunity for climate action in the United States. As Benji said, we have limited time, and so I've also been asked to ask you to make your remarks short, but we will get through this, and there's a lot to talk about, so I apologize that we won't be able to go as long as we wanted. Now, let's start at the top. energy policy has become more bipartisan. Just look at the Energy Policy Act of 2020. What are the areas where you find opportunities to work together? And why don't we start with Senator Murkowski?
So, I think it's technology. You got to be able to turn the button on. I really do think that when it comes to areas of cooperation, as we're going to make a difference with climate change, it's going to come with the advancements in technology. It's going to come in the area of efficiency. We saw that play out in the Energy Act that Senator Coons very kindly mentioned my role in, but that was significant legislation. It had been an even dozen years, 12 years since we have upgraded or renewed our energy policies. When you think about what happens in a 10 to 12 year time period, we had so far outstripped our policies. So where can you find these areas of consensus? And I think we identified those in the Energy Act when you're focusing on, again, efficiencies. When you are using less, everybody wins. Technologies, and this is technologies in all spaces, whether it's in the CCUS, the pioneering that we're doing there, all that we're doing to build out the renewables. In Alaska, where we see climate change front and center every day. I was telling Chris, with us, it's not so much extreme events, extreme weather events. We say it's extreme all the time up there. But in fairness, what we have is kind of a slow-moving disaster. Whether it is the continual erosion along our coastline, whether it is the thawing of the permafrost that is creating this instability throughout. So we're seeing this on a daily basis. So the need to act is now. The innovation that we are embracing in Alaska with regards to microgrids to help us facilitate these energy solutions right there on the ground where you are. So it's efficiency and it's technology.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Senator Bennett.
Thanks. I'd say, first of all, that there are amazing examples, as Lisa said, of bipartisan work in the Senate around energy that goes a long way back. You think about wind, for example, which has been something that's been supported by Republicans and Democrats for a long time, and that's the reason we've been able to make huge strides. I expect that with innovations around storage and other kinds of things, we're going to be able to do that as well. But just for purposes of the discussion today, the reason I think ultimately in a democracy like ours, bipartisanship is so important, is that it's not enough to just act urgently on climate, which is what I hear people say a lot of the time. You got to act urgently. You do have to act urgently, but it's not enough. We also need to have a durable solution, a solution that will last from one administration to the next administration, a solution that the next generation of Americans and global citizens can actually pick up on. If we accept the politics where I get my policies in for 2 years, the other side rips them out for the next 2 years, I put mine in for 2 years, the other side rips them out, I would argue that we will never solve climate change. The question for all of us that live in democracies is, can democracy solve climate change? I think that's an open question today, and it will be only answered yes if we can find a way to work together.
Thanks so much. It really does mean so much that you're coming here as a bipartisan group. It really shows the world how much you care. That's really important. Senator Rowe.
Well, I want to associate myself with their remarks as well, but what I want to say is this, is that cybersecurity, that is one area that we can get behind, all of us together. As we think about our energy grids, our water grids, our critical infrastructure. This is a great area of bipartisanship in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that all of us worked so hard on. I actually had a bill in there that is working to test our bulk energy grids. So I think it's really important. And in Nevada, we have wind, water, solar, and geothermal. And we have the most capacity for geothermal energy in the lower 48. I know they might have some in Alaska, I'm not sure. We're always second, everyone's always second to Alaska and so many things. But it's important that we do the research and development and that we protect it. And so I think cybersecurity is a really big area that we can get behind, protecting our energy grid in a bipartisan way.
Senator Rosen, thank you so much. You know, the Atlantic Council is currently running a task force on cybersecurity and the energy transition. So I'm inviting you now to speak to that task force at some point.
I accept that invitation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you. And the bipartisanship is, as everybody said, going to be integral to our ultimate success. I wanted to go back just for a moment. I was governor, got elected governor, and took office in 2011, and was approached by Fred Krupp about methane and trying to create methane regulations, which, and I didn't know at the time, but at that point there was no city, no county, no province, no country on earth that regulated methane. And yet we now know, and we knew back then, that it was one of the most harmful climate pollutants, and it was completely not bipartisan. We ended up getting several of the more larger producers of oil and gas in Colorado to sit down, and after a pretty long process, we created the first set of methane regulations in the world. Now, at this COP26, we have 90 countries have made a commitment to reduce their methane by 30% by, is that right? By 30% or was it by 70%? I get them. 30%. Thank you. By 2030. What a huge step forward, and it is, there's not a major oil company that I'm aware of that hasn't, on a bipartisan level, said that they're going to do this. I think the second, I mean, we all can go into all the different ways we can reduce carbon emissions, and it's in agriculture, it's in construction, it's everywhere. But I think the next place where we need to get bipartisan, and it's beginning to become bipartisan, is this whole notion about having some sort of a fee on your carbon emissions based on the harmfulness. So a fee and probably a dividend just to make sure that it gets bipartisan. But that should be what we all focus, because then you have, no matter what different aspect you're addressing climate pollution, you have a financial incentive. The market force is really pushing to get a solution.
Carbon price would be amazing. So I hope that this gets done. I want to talk a little bit more about technology for a second. You know, the Energy Act 2020 is invested in a whole range of technologies: nuclear, hydrogen, carbon capture, geothermal. What do you think is the most promising for you and your state? And I just want to be clear that Senator Bennett and Senator Hickenlooper cannot give the same answer. You have to give different answers.
It's a joy.
Nevada's between Colorado.
Yeah. You got to keep them apart. So Senator Murkowski, why don't you start?
The advantages certainly to our state of Alaska, where we truly have a little bit of all of the above. We're going to benefit from everything from CCUS, from what we're doing within the Energy Act and the Infrastructure Bill to build out additional hydro. We do have geothermal, some quite interesting and lucrative opportunities for us in geothermal. I mentioned we're the epicenter of microgrids for not only for the country, but really the world, in terms of how we are really being amazingly innovative with taking a little bit of, whether it is wind, whether it's a little bit of solar, maybe some marine hydrokinetic through the river, coupling that with some small battery storage. We're doing it all, and I think all of this in the Energy Act, coupled with the infrastructure bill now, is really going to help facilitate all of that. So we're going to be blessed with all of it.
Everybody can learn something from Alaska and what you're doing.
It's true. They do. Colorado has it all too. John and I think we live in the most beautiful state in the country, probably because we haven't spent as much time in Alaska and Nevada as these other people. But it is beautiful. These are all beautiful, incredible western states in our country. But this summer in Colorado, you know, it was terrible because of the fires from California. I mean, there were many days when you couldn't see the mountains. There were many days when there were health warnings because of smoke, not our smoke, even though we had the 3 worst fires last year in the state's history. This year it was smoke coming from California. So there is a very strong sense in our state that we need to act today. This is not about the future. It's about our economy today, our well-being today, our mental health, our physical health. And I think there are enormous opportunities. I mean, storage is one that's a big deal for us because we have a lot of wind, we have a lot of solar. If we can figure out that storage component, that's going to be really important to us. We are on the cusp, you know, if all things go according to plan, if it ever does in Washington, D.C., of passing a bill in the next week or so that will have the largest conservation, the biggest amount of money for conservation since the Dust Bowl. It will have the most significant investment in our national forests that we have ever had. And that may not sound like innovation, but when you think about the watersheds in Colorado that start in those national forests, the work that we're going to be able to do fire mitigation and watershed protection is going to make an enormous difference to every single farmer and rancher who's downstream and every single community who's downstream. And for people that are wondering, what does climate legislation look like? That's an example, I think, of climate legislation that can help stitch the country together.
Well, I can speak for Nevada. Here I am between the two Coloradan, but I'm going to talk about Nevada because we do have wind, we do have water. We forget about Hoover Dam about 100 years ago. It's still pumping out hydroelectric power today. We have more solar jobs per capita than any other state because Nevada has about 90+% of sunshine every year. We are number 2 in geothermal production, but we have amount of geothermal capacity to be number 1 in the country. And I just recently, up in northern Nevada, speaking of partnership together, we have partnered with solar arrays and geothermal to have a constant source of power. And of course, another thing that Nevada has is lithium. I believe we're the only place in the lower 48 that has lithium. So let's talk about battery storage, battery recycling, and all those things that are happening there. So we're doing that also in Nevada. I think we're a good model for what's going on. We're facing extreme drought. We have lots of water research going on, and of course, the wildfires that causes poor air quality. So this is a public health issue. It is an economic issue, and it's an issue for our future and for our children and grandchildren. And so it's really important that we work on all of those, and we have a little bit of everything in Nevada.
If I were to suddenly die on the way home, I hope I can come back and be the governor or the senator of Nevada. It is truly one of the most beautiful states.
Just to be clear, that's Senator Hickenlooper saying that, not Senator Bennett.
But Michael's up for re-election. He's in cycle right now, so he can't take those kinds of liberties. We've all given some version of all of the above just because there is so much that needs to be done and so much that works. That I have a particular soft point for the new science of strong materials, so different types of replacing concrete or better ways of making concrete. Same with steel, same with plastic, to be honest. But I'm going to be a broken record and come back to the getting a value on carbon, a price if you have it, just because how we make these decisions about where to dedicate these resources, we've got to estimate the risk that we're going to get what we're shooting to get. That's hard enough. But if we don't really understand what we're going to get out of it, we don't know how many tons of carbon per dollar we invest or per $1 million we invest, it just makes more guesswork. Obviously, there are many corporations and companies and inventors, and everyone's got putting a tremendous amount of pressure to make sure their ideas get funded in bills. I think the sooner we get a market that really begins helping define what are the real benefits, which processes are the most successful and effective, I think that would be my highest priority in a bill.
Thanks so much. The EIA did some great work a couple years back that showed that even a minimal price on carbon would accelerate in energy innovation just rapidly because those technologies would just all of a sudden be in the money much faster. I wanted to follow up on something Senator Rosen said about jobs. Lots and lots of jobs coming from the renewables industry, a huge opportunity, economic opportunity, but an energy transition does mean that some jobs will go away. How are your constituents talking to you about the energy transition, and what are their concerns, and what role should Congress be playing in that? And why don't we start with Senator Murkowski?
Yeah, this is what everybody is talking about. And before we get to the energy transition, I just need to say we really do have all of the above, because up to this point in time we haven't had nuclear, but we're going to actually have a small modular reactor that will be a pilot project from NREL that will be located at one of our military installations, and we think that that is quite exciting. Now, to the transition, because this is key. I come from a state that is an oil-producing state. I also come from a state that is seeing the impacts of climate change probably faster than any other, because we are in an Arctic area. So this is an issue for us. There is a responsibility to address what we see coming, but there is a reality that we face that our treasury, our state treasury, relies on the revenues that we receive from oil to pay for our education, to pay for public safety, for health care. And when you speak to the people who live in these remote areas who are threatened from climate change, they're saying, we have to address that, but how is my village going to survive if the state doesn't have the resources? So it is the ultimate challenge. It is the ultimate conundrum. I would suggest to you, though, that the answer is not to tell the people of Kotlik that for them, they are going to have to not have the advantages. They will not have the health clinic. They will not have running water. They will not have power generation in their village. That is not an option either. And so how we reconcile this as a transition, how we can help these communities not only survive, but to actually thrive in the regions that they have been in for thousands of years. This is our challenge. So allowing for a transition that is reasonable, but that is sustainable for all, is what we all need to be looking towards. We talk about a just transition. And we just ask you to carry with you what I carry with me. When I was in the village, interior river village, Aniak, I have a woman come up to me. She's carrying a 3-month-old baby, I believe. It was in her foster care. And she gave me a slip of paper, which was her receipt for her home heating fuel. It was for $50. She said, I was able to get 5 gallons of home heating fuel because it's gotten cold this week, and I need to keep my house warm. Next week, I'm going to use my $50 to buy baby formula. That kind of a trade-off should not be what we are facing. We're here at COP26. We're talking about what we need to be doing globally, but I just remind people that I work with that we still have very, very real human issues with those who are most energy vulnerable, and my state is one of those. So I don't have the answers. That's why I'm here, because I feel like I have to be part of a conversation. I have to be able to represent those views that are not heard because they are too far away and they are too humble to even ask. But knowing that these conversations could either be about us or we can be part of the solutions. This is why we're here with these very, very challenged transitions that we know are coming our way.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say this is why I feel so lucky to serve with Lisa Murkowski. Well, I do, and the reason is we live in a moment where too much political leadership is just about reflexive, partisan, it's not even ideology, just reaction so much of the time. And Lisa's not only willing to overcome that, she's willing to say that she doesn't have all the answers here. And I think that too often people think that they're folks who've dreamed up all the answers for them, and that the answers aren't terribly persuasive, which is why it's really important for us to listen to the people we represent. John mentioned a price on carbon, which I think is clearly, where we ought to head. One of the great virtues of that is you can use the proceeds of that to help with this transition that's so critical. And it can't be an afterthought. It can't be, something in the corner that's a just transition that you get to sometime in the future. It has to be essential and central to the cause. Everybody, most advocates of climate have made the case that we can make this transition, and on the other side of this transition, there are going to be better jobs at better wages. I believe that. Colorado is showing that. But we have to demonstrate that to people that don't necessarily believe it today by enacting policy like, funding these transitions in ways that is really, really meaningful. And I'd argue until we're willing to do that, it's going to be very, very hard for us to create the kind of climate policy that's really going to move this planet forward.
Thank you. And I want to say that real leadership is hard and it's messy. But if you care and you're passionate and you feel strongly about things, it's okay to be tough. It's great to be smart. But if you don't have heart, then where are you? And so in this case, when all of us feel like it is our responsibility to leave the world a better place than how we found it, for our children, for our grandchildren, for our friends, for whatever reason it means for you, we have to do the hard thing and the humble thing and be smart, be tough, and have heart, and that's where we make it equitable. And it's okay, and that's not partisan. And I think that we have to bring the reality of it down to the situation. So when we do research and development, when we make policy, and there's profits to be made because there's exciting things on the forefront. Technology has given us so many great things with quantum computing and artificial intelligence, this, that, and the other. We're going to do so many things. But we also have to be sure that we don't leave anyone behind. So smart and tough, but have heart, and be sure that we leave the world. We need to leave it better than how we got it. That's for sure. So that's what we need to do as leaders, and that's why we are all here today. Oh, you got?
I thought I had one. There it is. Roy Romer, who was a mentor of mine, I think a mentor of Michael's, three-term governor of Colorado, and he used to come into my bar and he'd say, he'd look around at people working and say, quality of life starts with a good job. And that was his premise upon which he built almost everything he did. And I think it comes back to and Michael alluded to this, the challenge of how do we get a price, a fee and dividend, some sort of a price on carbon, and get bipartisan. This is just where we started today. If people feel left behind, and Lord knows we have a pretty sorry track record in the United States and in the world in terms of as automation or artificial intelligence leaves people behind, we haven't done a good job of not just retraining them, but lining them up and making sure that we are having somewhat comparable jobs and somewhat comparable pay. One nice thing about doing a fee and dividend program is it allows you to look at all those places where we've closed coal mines. There's a lot of environmental degradation there that needs to be repaired, and a lot of those jobs are going to be pretty well paying. They're going to take a certain amount of skills, or certain sets of skills that people who worked in the oil and gas industry or in the coal industry knew very well. I think as we go forward on all this, we have to try to keep that North Star that these are people's lives. These are communities, whether they're in Alaska or whether they're out on the far southeastern plains of Colorado or in northern Nevada. These are people's lives, and these communities have been a fabric for so long that it's got to be one of our highest priorities as we make each decision.
Thank you. So final question, rapid fire, 30 seconds, no more than that. And let's go in reverse order this time. So starting with Senator Hickenlooper, what are you going to work on together for climate action in a bipartisan way when you get back from Glasgow?
So the first day?
First day back.
I still, and I know we're a long way from having the collaboration, but I still think the fee, some sort of figuring out what that fee and dividend is going to look like and what it means down the road will be it's what I mostly will work on when I get back. Absolutely.
That would be fantastic.
Well, this one's easy because Lisa and I were talking about this today. Water. There's too much in some places, not enough in others, like my state, and not usable in other places. So we need to work on water issues. Water is a source of life, and we already had this conversation earlier. So I think we're going to start doing some water stuff, huh?
I'd combine these two things by saying that in my 30 seconds, there was a moment in time this summer when Colorado and northern Utah had the worst air quality of any places on planet Earth, worse than Beijing. And I said to Mitt Romney on the floor of the Senate, let's go float the Colorado River, which we did for 6 hours in Utah to talk about pricing, a price on climate, a price on carbon, and also just broader issues of water and forestry and the kind of resource constraints that we're all facing. There's a tremendous amount of room here to do good bipartisan work, and I think we'll figure it out.
So first thing I'm going to do is we're going to get this infrastructure bill signed. Don't know when the president's going to do that, but the fact of the matter is we got to get folks moving on that right now. We got to get those jobs going, whether it's in the space of hydro or renewable, grid modernization. Let's get moving with that infrastructure bill because that is tangible, and that's something that we can actually point to now.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have. Thank you for your leadership. It is remarkable, and it's so fantastic that you're here as a bipartisan group. Thank you again. Thank you again. Now I'm going to pass off to my colleague to wrap us up.
Great, thank you. What a fantastic conversation. We're ready to fire it up and do it. There are some questions, I think, from members of the media, and I was looking for Lisa Friedman, if Lisa is here. No, Lisa. Tim? Okay, hands up. Who's got a question? Anybody? Yeah, you want to just come on up, all the members? Yeah, please do. Come right up. Sir, you had a question? Yep.
Hi there. Hello? Good? Better?
Senator Coons, if you'd like to take a seat, you're welcome to. Yeah, why not?
Hello? Hello? Yes? Good?
Sheldon, come up here.
Senators everywhere.
We're ready for your questions.
Hi there, Dan Zach from the Washington Post. I just wanted to follow up on something that Senator Bennett suggested, which is, the U.S. leadership and Congress lurches back and forth, who's in control. This time next year, Republicans could, be on their way to taking full control again. For an issue as urgent as climate change that requires kind of united and speedy action, is Congress up to the task if we keep lurching back and forth? Yes, we have this bipartisan bill that just passed, but that seems like sort of a rarity these days. Is Congress capable as a branch of meeting the moment, or how could it be more capable? And gladly hear the answers from anyone.
I just want to say I disagree 100% with your premise.
All right, let's hear
Because,
it.
well, first of all, every single one of us work on bipartisan bills every day, and pretty much every bill that's passed is a bipartisan bill. That's not the storyline that's covered out of Washington. It's always about the parties fighting this, that, or the other thing. But for example, as Lisa said, this bill has literally over $60 billion specifically for climate in it, which is really important for resiliency, the stuff we talked about in the first panel. $60 billion just for resiliency and for agriculture and for mitigation. So we do that, and it's just a question of getting votes. So when you don't see bipartisan stuff, it just means you're not getting votes on bipartisan legislation that's already been written. But every single one of us could probably tell you at least 24 bills we have ready to go that's bipartisan. Usually they get tucked into larger bills that are must pass. So for example, the next must pass bill that's going to be voted on the next 2 weeks is the NDAA, the National Defense Bill. We have bipartisan legislation in that bill that will move. So we will get stuff done regardless of who's in charge. It rarely makes the headlines, but it will get done. And I think the bipartisanship you heard in the last two panels is outstanding. And going to a climate conference like this, where we get to hear each other's ideas, find the common ground, is exactly what is needed more of. And that's why this group of committed senators are going to make a difference.
I would take, just go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I don't want to rebut my friend and colleague from New York, but we need more than me and John. And so I am concerned. I am concerned about durable climate legislation, because Michael, I think you said it very well, that we can kind of go ping pong back and forth if it is a wholly partisan initiative, or maybe just one or two Republicans that join the legislation. I do think that there will be an effort in when there is a change in administration, we will go back to, we'll try to overturn it with a CRA. We will do what we can to change the law unless it is bipartisan. And so if there is going to be a fee on carbon as a transformational climate policy, it will only come about if it is bipartisan. And I should go further than that. It's not just coming about, it's enduring. And that's what you've got to have with climate legislation, is that it be enduring. Because if it's not, nobody's going to make the investment. They're going to wait for the next administration to see who's in charge.
And let me just say, I agree with that too, because I think there are people can look at Congress and say, man, you can't do anything hard. You can't do anything hard on immigration. You can't do anything hard on climate. You can't. And my point is only this, that we just can't accept the current politics, and I don't accept them if you want to deal with climate change and you want to do it in a durable way. We used to have this thing, some of you are too young to remember it, but we used to have this thing called American foreign policy. And that foreign policy, whether you were a Democratic president or a Republican president, you generally knew what your obligations were to the transatlantic, alliance, and with respect to the Soviet Union and the Cold War. And we didn't win that war putting ideas in 2 years in and ripping them out 2 years later. And I'm not saying this is the same thing as that, but it is going to require us to have a much longer attention span than the one we generally have. And it will require us, I think, to pass legislation in a way that we're not used to doing it, that actually can endure. And I will say this, I do believe there will be an American climate policy that presidents, whether Republicans or Democrats, in the end, are going to be duty-bound to support.
I'm going to take the privilege of the mic for one more minute and then give it to Tammy. Senator Bennett asked the right question earlier, which is, the fundamental contest between authoritarian and democratic societies is being put to the test in how we respond to climate. And if we can't come up with a durable bipartisan strategy to address climate, we're going to fail. I'll point you again to the Energy Policy Act of 2020, which Chairman Murkowski and Ranking Member Manchin led. It had 29 bills by 70 senators included in it. It was signed into law by President Trump. The bipartisan infrastructure bill put $73 billion into implementing it. Does it solve everything? No. But does it point us in a good direction? Yes. And so I think if there was an underlying message to the two panels you just heard from, it's that there are changes. The Climate Solutions Caucus over the last 2 years has had more than 30 sessions. And we have heard from dozens of CEOs and business groups. They say they want a price on carbon. Now they have to actually act like it. They have to advocate for it, not just by buying an ad in the New York Times, not just by signing up to a policy, but by putting their political muscle and resources behind it, or it's not going to happen. There was so much time and resources dedicated to climate denialism that turning it around is going to take activity and engagement. There are young evangelicals. We have a pope in Pope Francis. We have elements of the faith community that previously were not engaged on climate that are vocal and engaged. We have younger conservatives. Benji Backer was just here and represents an organization with chapters on college campuses around the country. I think the politics of climate are changing. The question is, will they change fast enough? And we need to come up with a strong bipartisan answer. Senator Baughman.
Senator Baldwin.
Senator Hickenlooper wanted me to remind everyone that there were 69 votes for the infrastructure bill. I want to tackle your questions sort of taking the in-between, between the extremes. If you look at the bipartisan infrastructure bill, a lot of things are going to begin to happen that aren't really subject to repeal. We put in all these electric charging stations. It's not like a Republican president is going to say rip them all out, right? If we start changing some of the agriculture practices that we were talking about in the first panel, it's not like the farmers are going to get up one day and say, I'm not going to do contour farming anymore on my hilly farm. So there's a lot of things that are going to be implemented fairly quickly that are going to be enduring. I certainly see the prospect of, maybe an administrative regulation that gets a lot of pushback that may be subject to a CRA. But I want to tell a little story about that. Under the last administration, the clean energy regulation was overturned. And I remember this wonderful meeting I had with some of the executives at the utilities that serve Wisconsin customers. And they came in shortly after it had been reversed, and they said, you know what, Senator, we made all our goals anyhow. And I said, how'd that happen? And they said, our customers were demanding clean energy. And they were willing to pay a little bit more to see that come through. I said, then why did you whine so much about it and make my life so miserable as I was supporting this? And they're saying, well, we don't like the regulation. But in fact, they met the goals. And we're going to see private action that is going to really solidify a lot of the things we're talking about that are moving, whether it's in a partisan bill or a bipartisan bill. So it's not like the Affordable Care Act. This is a little bit different, and that's why I want to take that middle of the road, no extreme. We're going to get some stuff done that are going to have lasting impacts.
Thank you. I know we've got more questions in the back. Zach
And
Coleman,
I just want
political.
to add.
Time is short, I know.
Yeah.
Bus is going to leave y'all.
No, but is this on?
I'm just kidding. The bus is not going to leave you.
Hi, Zach Coleman with Politico. I've been here like a week now. This is put on by a conservative government, this COP. And there is a lot of talk about wind, solar, things like that. Before everyone here left for the COP, Republicans in the Senate put out their own climate plan that doesn't really give a lot of airtime to those technologies. And I noticed that in Build Back Better there are billions for things that Republicans do support, like CCS, nuclear, things like that. So this is kind of for Senator Murkowski. I'm wondering, what conversations do you have within your own caucus about getting over the hump on renewables like solar and wind? And is that still, and when you come here and you see conservative governments can support that, what kind of conversations do you have with your own caucus?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not just me bringing these issues up. I have colleagues from Texas that will proudly say, hey, we got more wind in Texas than anywhere else. And while they may not go out and speak about that first and foremost, there is a recognition, and I don't mean to put words in colleagues' mouths, but there's a recognition that, yeah, we do wind. You think about the other opportunities for renewables in states where these are Republican states, and they're doing quite well, thank you very much, with solar, and the biofuels in Iowa is a great example. Some pretty conservative senators there. So I think there is kind of a pragmatic reality that, yeah, these renewables are here. These renewables are bringing good jobs to our state. They're actually providing good benefits to us. And so this is again where I think it's important to recognize that the way that the media or the press might put Republicans and Democrats in different boxes when it comes to things like renewables, it doesn't mean just because you're a Republican that you don't think renewable solutions are not out there. I think part of the challenge has been an acknowledgement that renewables are still, for the most part, an intermittent source. And if we want reliability, which we all want, we're going to have to talk about what our base load is. And so let's not be afraid to talk about where that base load power comes from. Maybe it's nuclear, maybe it's natural gas, maybe it's oil. What is our base load? How are we going to be able to incorporate into the grid all of these different renewables? So I think there's just a pragmatism to it. It's not that Republicans do not believe in renewables.
I think we have to cut it off there. I'm sorry. Yeah, this group has to go. On behalf of the Resilience Hub and the Race to Resilience, which is a global effort with dozens of initiatives, Global South and Global North, I want to recognize that Administrator Sam Power was here from USAID. Thank you for coming. And Senator Sheldon Whitehouse popping out again, but thank you for coming by. Thanks, everybody. And I just want to say that there are solutions. This is investable, and we can do this. And call us. We can help you. Thank you for coming. Thanks for all that you are going to do, because we're counting on you. Thank you.